Well, with missile tests putting Asia on edge and Iranian terrorism and nuclear threats putting America's military on alert, I paid a timely visit to U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton at the White House, and he had plenty to say on those two situations and much more. Mr. Ambassador, the world is on fire. We got issues in North Korea, Venezuela, China. What's the biggest worry that America should have right now in terms of global fires that are ongoing?
Well, we've got immediate issues with Russia and China on a range of questions. These are obviously the two most competitive powers for us in the world, but on an urgent basis, the threat of terrorism and nuclear proliferation around the world very much on the administration's mind. These are threats we've faced for a long time, but a lot of due bills are coming due in the Trump administration from past policy failures that the administration inherited we're now trying to deal with.
Venezuela has certainly surfaced as a major crisis. We're seeing Russia, Cuba, other countries inject themselves into Venezuela. Does that give you a greater level of concern than if it were just Venezuela kind of finally coming to terms with the collapse of socialism?
Absolutely. You know, Venezuela has the largest reserves of petroleum of any country in the world, and the idea that Russia, China, others would end up in control of those petroleum reserves, I think should worry all Americans. You know, this is an issue where we found enormous support throughout the Western Hemisphere, with a few exceptions. Countries support Juan Guaido, the interim president, to try and get rid of the illegitimate, as you say quite rightly, failed government of Nicolas Maduro. We see 54 governments around the world have recognized Juan Guaido. So this is not a made in Washington crisis in Venezuela. This is something the people of Venezuela feel very strongly about. They want a chance to pick their own government. They want to lift themselves up out of the poverty that 20 years of failed pursuit of socialism has created. The situation in Venezuela is very dire. We've got right now the worst refugee crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere. 3 to 4 million Venezuelans have already fled the country. So there's a sense of urgency we feel that we need to resolve this. We want to see the peaceful transition of power from Maduro to Juan Guaido, and we hope that that'll be coming soon.
Does it complicate it that there are even some conservative voices who say, we really don't have an interest there, and if we get engaged in Venezuela, we're going to end up putting Americans at risk, and it's going to blow up in our faces?
Well, you know, there are 40 to 45,000 American citizens by our estimate in Venezuela right now. They are already at risk. Our friends all around the hemisphere are bearing the burden of this refugee crisis. There's a humanitarian tragedy underway in Venezuela. And the possibility of foreign powers gaining once again a base of operations very close to America, I think should concern everyone. So this is not some idealistic crusade for democracy. Core American national security interests are involved here.
Would we likely or possibly see military intervention from the United States?
Well, you know, the president's been very clear that all options are on the table, but he's been equally clear we want to see a peaceful transfer of power. That's why we've worked so closely with Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, governments that are very important to us, our friends in Europe and around the world. I think really we see a kind of unity here as well in the domestic political scene. I've spoken with Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate. They've offered suggestions. We've worked well together. Really, this is one of the few issues in a very partisan time in Washington where there's near universal agreement. They want to see Maduro gone. They want to see Guaido in.
A year ago, things seemed to be moving positively with North Korea. Right now, appears just from the outside to be somewhat of a stall. Do you anticipate there's going to be sort of a new wave of progress in getting North Korea to look at denuclearization?
Well, it depends on North Korea. You know, I think the president did exactly the right thing in Hanoi. He got some criticism from the usual suspects for walking away from a bad deal with North Korea. But my view is any kind of meeting like that is a success when America's national interests are preserved. And I thought the president did a great job there. As I say, he's receptive to more discussions. He's Going back to the Singapore summit last year, he really held the door open for North Korea. He showed them what a potentially bright economic future they could have if they just give up their nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. That's still there. President's still willing to do it. He's ready to meet for a third time when that's appropriate. So we're really waiting to hear now back from North Korea.
Area of the world near and dear to my heart, Middle East, specifically Israel. Netanyahu wins re-election. There's a stability there. There seems to be a growing instability in Iran. Paint the picture for us, the Middle East, the Iranian sanctions, how they're working, stability of the rest of the region. Where are we?
Well, as the president likes to put it, if you look around the Middle East and really more broadly and say, what's the cause of the problem here? What's the cause of the instability there? Over and over again, the answer he hears is Iran. So it's not just their nuclear and ballistic missile programs, although those are obviously very concerning. For decades, they've been the world's central banker of international terrorism. That continues today. They've got conventional forces in Iraq and Syria causing enormous trouble. But the president's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, absolutely the right decision to make. He's called it probably the worst deal the United States ever made diplomatically. That's exactly correct. We've put enormous economic pressure on the regime in Iran. That pressure has now been increased because of the elimination of the waivers for the sale of Iranian oil. We've put even more pressure by designating the Revolutionary Guards as a foreign terrorist organization, which they certainly are. We've tried to strengthen the hand of our friends in Israel. The president's moved our embassy to Jerusalem. He's recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a critical defensive position on the border with Syria. So I think the government of Iran is now really having to face some hard truths here. If they were to change their behavior, the president said a year ago when French President Macron was here, he'd negotiate with them on a new nuclear deal and dealing with their ballistic missile program, their support for terrorism, their other malign activities. He'd be ready to talk about all that, put everything on the table.
The president's policies, often from his own instincts, have seemed to work a lot better than the policies in the previous administration. And those policies that he's put in place are things that I've heard you talk about for many years. So you have to feel like that this administration is on the right track to bring a strong America and that position to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Look, I think Make America Great Again in many respects means make America respected around the world again. We don't go on apology tours in this administration. The president, being a business negotiator, knows you should start from a position of strength. That's why he's increased military budgets dramatically from the failed Obama years. But I come back to the point I made. 8 years of Obama have left us in a hole here and a hole there. We've got a lot of problems that have to be solved. We're on the way to solving many of them. But I think the American people need to understand that we've seen a lot of mistakes that preceded the Trump administration. So that's one reason why we're so busy.
Final question. We talked about a lot of hot spots around the world when we started. Is there a hot spot that you're concerned about, that the president is concerned about, that maybe doesn't make the front page every day?
Well, you know, what we're worried about now after the defeat of the ISIS territorial caliphate, which is a big victory for the West as a whole and for the United States, is that the terrorists are going to go elsewhere. They're going to threaten us in other places. And we've been very fortunate not to have significant external terrorist attacks in the United States. We've had some that have been inspired and maybe directed from outside, but it would be a mistake to let our vigilance down and to think that, well, we're out of danger now. Actually, in Europe, terrorist plots from Iran have increased over the past couple of years. So this is something we cannot forget. 9/11, it seems hard to believe it's almost 18 years ago. That took us completely by surprise. We cannot let that happen again.
Mr. Ambassador, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for the job you're doing, and thanks for being here.
It's so good to see you again.
Good to see you. Ambassador John Bolton has one of the toughest jobs in Washington and the world. Keep him and our nation's security in your prayers. And you can learn more about our National Security Advisor at whitehouse.gov/NSC. If You can also follow him on social media at AMB John Bolton. That AMB is for Ambassador.